there, Dungeon Crawl fans. Welcome back to the channel. My name is Ron, and today we're going to be kicking off part 2 of my series on the Hunters, AD 2114. In this video, we're going to be doing a setup of the campaign. We're going to be going through the whole process as if we're just getting started with the entire campaign. One thing to keep in mind with the Hunters is, unlike some campaign games, there is no one-off mode or raid mode, or you're only going to be able to play in the campaign. There's no way to just play it kind of a one-shot. So what we're going through today is the setup for the very first part of the campaign, and then all of this stuff will help you set up the game when you're getting ready to do another mission, or if you're getting ready to put the game back out on the table after having taken a break and saving the game. You're going to need both books when you're setting up the game. You're going to need both the rule book and the mission book. So the setup is kind of split between these two. You're going to start with the rule book. You're going to go through two kind of phases of setup, and then you go through the mission book where you're going to actually set up the very beginning mission and kind of the initial scenario for the game. So on the rule book, if you turn to page 5, there's a character setup before starting the campaign, but actually on page 6 here, is starting the campaign. So the actual rules for going through all the steps of starting the campaign, and the very first step is set up your characters. So really it starts here. We're going to go through this step by step, and the first thing that we need to do is set up our characters as described right down here. The first thing you're going to want to do is have every player at the table pick which character they want to play. Now there are 5 characters to choose from, as we saw in the unboxing video, which, by the way, if you haven't watched it, definitely give it a watch. I'll put the link down in the description. It's definitely worth checking out. It's a box tour of the game with all the components and gives you a good overview of kind of what you can expect from the game. Anyhow, every player needs to pick a character that they want to play, and there are 5 choices. There's the soldier, the sniper, the recon, the medic, and the huntsman/huntress. Now, I have been playing a bit of training as I've been learning how to play the game so that I can walk you guys through it, and one thing I will have to say is that if it's your first time playing the game, I really recommend that you have the soldier in your party. They're the only character that starts with a melee weapon, and this game is really brutal if you don't have anybody in melee, and the first few combats are very melee heavy. And so I don't know if that, maybe it's a bit of a design oversight. It might be good to have 2 characters that start with melee weapons, or at least give somebody a knife. I'd spent most of the majority of my training game just figuring out how to make a knife so I could defend myself in melee. So again, if it's your first time, you don't have to, but I would recommend having the soldier in your group. The other 5 classes are pretty much, you can pick anyone you want and you think you're going to be happy. The medic obviously is going to have lots of cards around healing. The recon has about half cards about healing and half cards about moving around the battlefield very quickly. The sniper is obviously focused on really high damage single target hits, and the huntsman is a little interesting mix of kind of both doing damage and moving around the battlefield. So they all have their interesting roles to play, and of course the soldier is really good at combat, and they show him with a gun, but I think if in my playthrough I'm going to be building him as a melee fighter. For the playthrough of the game that I'm going to be doing on video, I've chosen to play as the soldier and the recon. So these are the 2 characters that I'll be getting ready to set up, but you'll be able to go through the same process with any of the characters. It's basically the same. There's no special rules for each character other than the specific components that they receive. So the first thing you want to do is take the character sheet for your character and the miniature for your character and go ahead and set those aside and just keep them nearby so you're ready to get started. The next thing you're going to want to do is go ahead and get the equipment tokens for each character that you're going to be playing. So for the soldier here, we're going to be starting with a machete and some goggles. So we'll go ahead and grab the machete token and we'll put that onto his weapon row, and then we'll take his goggles, which allow him to ignore the weather rules for line of sight as well as target number counting. So we'll talk more about those when we actually get into the gameplay, but that helps him set up a target even in imperfect conditions. And I'm managing the recon off camera, but they're going to be starting with the pistol and the night vision goggles, which allow them to ignore nighttime rules. The next thing you're going to be asked to find is the turn token for your 2 classes that you've chosen. These are the white round tokens, and you're going to go ahead and just set these aside for now, but have them available. I put them on the sheet to start with, but they're immediately going to have a new home once we set up the base. Each character will also need a level tracker and a health tracker. The level tracker starts on level 1, and that basically shows you what your maximum health pool is at this point. And then your health tracker simply goes on that space inside of the level token. So this denotes your maximum HP, and as you take damage, it's going to move down this way, and as you get healed, you'll be able to heal up to your maximum. When you level up, this tracker actually moves up, giving you more health points. The next step is to grab the morale and food tokens as denoted on your character sheet. So the soldier here starts with 1 morale token, and he starts with 3 food tokens. So I've gone ahead and grabbed those, and we'll put them on his sheet. The next thing you're going to want to do is find the action card deck for each character that's going to be in the game. These are easy to tell because they have each character's symbol on the back of the deck so that it's very easy for you to find which one belongs to which character. Your action deck should be pre-sorted, but in case you've played before or something happened, just go ahead and go through and find all the cards that are level 1. There's going to be 25 total cards, and once you have all those, that's going to comprise your initial action deck for your character. The rest of the cards, numbered 2 through 6, are cards that will become available to your action card pool as you level up. Go ahead and take these cards, give them a nice thorough shuffle, and set them down next to your deck, or next to your player sheet. Okay, and here's both characters set up and ready to play. One thing that the rulebook doesn't tell you to do, but I think would be handy, is to go ahead and grab the hidden status indicator tokens for each class. These are unique to each class and will have their class symbol, as well as a poison tracker token for each class. You can just set these aside just in case those characters get poisoned. And these ones you can just put on their sheet, and you'll be able to use them out on the field if your character goes hidden. And with that, you've completed the setup for your characters. Going back to the rulebook, the next steps are going to be to set up our base, and then get started with locations and the mission book. So let's get our base set up next. The next thing you're going to want to do is go ahead and set up your base board. And your base board has a whole bunch of information that you're going to be tracking, including which day it is, what rooms you have installed, what equipment you have stored, and what turn it is. So this board's always going to be out on the table while you're playing the game. The next thing you want to do is for each character in the game, you'll choose 1 room card to have already built in your base ready to go. Your choices are the workshop, the gunsmith, the forge, the lab, and the armory. I've chosen the armory because none of our characters start with any armor, so it seems like a really good idea to be building armor as quickly as possible. And then I'd also like to build the workshop to get access to a bunch of the cool sort of gadgets and components that it makes available to you. All of them are really useful and they're very cheap to build, so you're not making a huge game-changing decision here, especially because you're going to have to do some questing before you have any components to build anything anyway. The gunsmith does allow us to build some beginning guns. Obviously the forge is great for building initial melee equipment, and the lab allows you to build med kits, stims, and other cool stuff. But I think these 2 are going to be really good for us to start the game. One thing I did outside of what the rules say for setting up the game is I actually went through the blueprint cards here and sorted them by the level and type of building. So here's level 1 armory, level 2 armory, level 3 armory. And then I sorted them alphabetically so that it would be very easy for me to find specific blueprints in case I buy them or are given them from part of a mission or something along those lines. Plus it helps you kind of see very quickly which ones are available to you and what their cost is. So actually what I did was I took the ones for the buildings or the rooms that I have. So in this case I have level 1 armory and level 1 workshop, and I'm just going to take the level 1 cards and I'm just going to kind of keep them near my base. And once I start earning these blueprints, I'll kind of flip them over. So like here's the ones I have available, these ones I don't have yet, or something along those lines, just so I can easily keep track of what's available to me. Not outlined in the rulebook, but just a nice trick to help you keep your game organized and minimize the amount of time you have to spend looking up specific cards. The next thing you're going to want to do is go ahead and find that day tracker token. Make sure it's on the hourglass side and not on the 30 side, and then place it on day 1 of the day tracker. As you go through days in the game, this tracker is going to move up, covering up which day it is, and then once it hits 30, you're going to go ahead and flip it over to start counting to 31, with 56 being the final day of the game. If you haven't won by then, it's a loss. You're also going to want to go ahead and grab one of these time trackers for each room that you have on the base. These go on the base, and when you start building something, you can use them to track how long the building process has gone on in days. Once it reaches this point, the construction is complete and you can take it off the track. These are just handy to have nearby. There are also room tokens like these, which allow you to track when a room will be finished building. You don't need to have them out or anything set up right now, but they're useful to have handy when you're ready to start building the rooms in your base or upgrading them. The next thing you're going to want to do is go ahead and go through all those event cards, sort them by number, and then place them into these individual dividers. The 400 series cards are all of your location cards. All the rest before and after it are going to be event cards that you're going to have sorted. One other thing I did is the cards actually come in order on this side, so 1, 2, 3, and I simply reversed everything so that it's very easy for me to go through here and find the cards with the numbers that I'm looking for. So that might be something that you're interested in doing, so you can easily search through cards without potentially seeing what's on them. Lastly, if you have the new Huntsville expansion, you can go ahead and add it now. All you're going to be doing is shuffling a few location cards and then a number of event cards in this 500 series. From what I understand, New Huntsville doesn't really add too much to the game in terms of additional complexity or difficulty, just a new location to explore as well as several new missions to do. So there's no reason to not include it right away, from what I understand, just to make the game a little more diverse and interesting. The rulebook does say to keep this by your base, but I would say keep everything in mind as we look through all these components and figure out what's going to work best for your table. This game does take up a lot of table space, so you're going to want to be creative when it comes to setting everything up. Next, go ahead and find all of the road event cards for Zone 1, Zone 2, and Zone 3, as well as the city event cards. Shuffle them separately, and then place this cover card on top of each deck. The next steps in the rulebook are to set up the location and site cards as well as the hunter marker, but really we need to go to the mission book in order to do that. This step 8 simply tells you where to go next in the mission book in order to get the game kicked off. This is the beginning of the actual campaign, so let's move over to the mission book and get that going next. The very first page of the mission book is a starting the campaign section, which continues that setup process. First, there's a bunch of story text here, which we're not going to read right now. I'm going to save that to read during the beginning of our actual scenario playthrough, which will be coming up next. But for now, we're going to need to go through and set up these location cards as described right here. As an important distinction, the setup in the mission book tells us to set up two types of cards. The cards with a sort of radioactive nuclear power plant symbol are location cards, and the cards with the compass symbol are event cards. The location cards all come from that 400 series, while everything else, all the other event cards, are 1 to 400 as well as 500 plus. So just keep that in mind as you're searching for cards to add. The mission book tells us to get cards 404 through 412 as well as event card 1. I pulled out these two 408 cards just to show you that some cards do actually change as the course of events take place. 408 and 408A. When you're doing setup, unless it specifically calls for the A version or otherwise of a card, it's always going to be the base one. So in this case, you're not going to put 408A out, just 408. This will get put out some other time. There are two kinds of location cards. Locations, which can easily be distinguished because they have a stop and a danger symbol, and sites, which can be easily distinguished because they have a street sign in addition to the town sign. Basically, locations are areas out in the world, and sites are sub-locations within each location. So you're going to want to set up your board so that you have all of your locations in zones, and then these sites somehow underneath them to distinguish that they're available there. These do tell you, for example, that these are part of New Jensen, the main town in the game. So as an example here, I've got two bands set up of the three actual location bands. Essentially, just like we saw with the road event cards, there are three levels of danger out in the wilderness. Level 1, which has one skull. Level 2, which you can see here has two skull symbols. And then eventually you'll have level 3 skulls out here, which are the most dangerous parts of the world to explore. This basically designates how far away from your base you're traveling in order to get to those locations. Now on top of that, we're going to be setting up our sites underneath these locations to help us designate where they are. Here's an example of what the initial setup can look like for your locations and zones. Here I've got Zone 2 with El Infierno and Zone 1 with New Jensen. Underneath El Infierno I have the 3 sites that are currently available, and under New Jensen I have the 4 sites that are currently unavailable. Additionally, the mission book tells us to put event card 001 on top of card 404. So that goes on top of New Jensen. Now it's important to note there are 4 ways that event cards can be put on top of these locations and sites. The 2 ways are face down on top, face up on top, face up on bottom, and face down on bottom. The main distinguisher here is if the card is on top, then you have to encounter that card as soon as you move to that location. So for example, as soon as we move to 404, New Jensen, we have to flip over and resolve this card. If it's underneath, we may resolve this card when we're on that location. We choose to. And the difference between face up and face down is fairly clear. Face up, you can read it beforehand. Face down, you can't. If a card is face down and you choose to start reading it, you can't stop reading it. You essentially have to completely resolve that card once you've decided to encounter it. The instructions in the mission book tell us to put number 001 on top of 404 face down, which means as soon as we enter that location, we'll be resolving that card. And what do you know, the final step of the location setup is to take the hunter's marker here, which designates the location of your party of hunters, and place it onto 404. Technically there, you are entering that space, so the very first thing you have to do is resolve this card. Now, we're going to look at this card in the next video when we start the campaign, but we're going to go ahead and keep setting up so that we're ready to go right away. This takes us to mission 1, the beginning. This symbol right here means resolve mission. Conveniently, the beginning mission is located right here opposite this page where you just finished setting everything up. Now again, there is some flavor text here as well as a few things that's going to get us set up. We're going to ignore most of that and just do the setup itself so that next time when we start the playthrough, we'll be able to jump right in and start exploring the game. Every mission is going to have several components that you need to pay attention to. There's a battle map, the setup steps, the objective, special rules, victory, defeat, and for 2 or 3 characters. These are all really important things to keep in mind when you're setting up and playing the mission. For setup itself, the most important thing is the setup process as well as the diagram. While you're playing the mission, you want to pay attention to these things, which we'll look at next time. Here's a closer look at that setup. So right here we can see there's only one tile, STR01, and it's also showing us 2 other important pieces of information. This is an enemy deployment zone, and this is your character's deployment zone. We'll take a look at these in just a second. The only thing I wanted to note was here's the list of setup steps, and then some information for 2 or 3 characters, which we'll come up and look at right at the end of setup. Going back to the rulebook for a second, on page 17 here you can find instructions for actually setting up the entire mission. There's 2 basic phases of setting it up, which starts with character setup and then goes into setting up the actual mission itself. We'll go through these steps next. The first step of mission setup is likely something you're going to skip the first few times you play the game until at least somebody is level 2. Essentially, the first thing you need to do is build a 25 card action deck. At the beginning of the game at level 1, you've only got 25 cards, so there's no work to be done. But once you start leveling up, you're going to add 3 or 4 action cards to your deck every time you level up. So when you come to a mission, you actually have to whittle down this deck to just 25 cards. So there is a cool deck building aspect that's going to come into play as well. The next step is each player is going to go through their action card deck and pick 5 cards to be their initial hand. That means you basically get to build and set up your very first turn, which is totally awesome. Finally, once you've picked your 5, go ahead and give your action card deck a good shuffle to make sure it's randomized. Next, you're going to set up all the tiles for the mission. In this case, there's only one tile, so we're going to go ahead and put this out in the middle of the table. After that, if there are any terrain tokens on the map, you'd place them out now. There aren't any in this one, but if there were, they would just go in specific zones and maybe have other tokens on top of them. Next, go ahead and grab the enemy cards for any enemies that are going to be featured in this mission. In the very first mission, we're going to be dealing with 1 muscle with a club and 1 bandit with a pistol. We're going to take these cards and put them next to our combat tiles so we can easily reference them as we're doing our fighting. Next, we need to take a look at the mission book to see where these guys actually deploy. In this particular mission, all of the enemies are going to be just on this one tile, so we're going to go ahead and grab miniatures relating to those enemies and place them out on the board. Now in this particular case, we're fighting against 2 different types of bandits, so I went ahead and grabbed a miniature from the Bandit A series and a second miniature from the Bandit B series. For our purposes, this Bandit A here that's pointing with his fist is going to be our bandit with a pistol, and this one here pointing with his pointer finger is going to be our muscle with a club. Once again, looking at the mission book, you can see here where the deployment zone is. So for us, we're allowed to deploy in either of these 2 squares. I've thought about this and I've decided to go ahead and put the soldier right here, and we're going to put the recon right here. These symbols on the board do matter. This, for example, is open ground, and this is cover, but we'll get into these in the next video. The last thing you're going to want to do is take a look to see what time of day the mission takes place at, if it takes place during the day or during the night, as well as any other modifiers that might be up here, such as taking place during a blizzard, which is terrible. Ask me how I know. If you're playing with less than 4 people, you're going to want to check this playing for 2 or 3 characters section to see how the game is modified. For example, we're playing with only 2 characters, so the bandit with a pistol starts with 2 damage tokens, and the muscle with a club starts with 1. As such, we'll go ahead and put 2 damage on the bandit with a pistol, and 1 damage on the muscle with a club. Now there are individual cards for tracking each instance of a monster or enemy, so you're probably going to want to put them on the board somehow to denote, but in this case, since there's only one of each, I'm going to put them right out here. You're also going to want to grab your defense dice, your attack dice, as well as some damage tokens to keep track of damage that's going out as you play through the mission. Like any good campaign adventure game, there's also about a zillion other tokens that you need to keep track of as well. Train tokens, damage tokens, fuel cell tokens, which are like money, component tokens, which are used for crafting, experience point tokens for leveling up, morale tokens for doing cool stuff in combat, food tokens for eating, findings tokens, gear room tokens, event tokens, and story tokens. Most of these you're going to want to be you can have set aside for just when you need them, but a few of them are going to be important all the time. Finally, it's a good idea to have one of these reference sheets available at the table in case you need to look up some of these icons. The game does come with 4 of these, but I'm not sure that you're ever going to need more than 1 at the table. They are very large and take up quite a bit of space, but they do have a lot of good information on them as well. Go ahead and grab those turn tracking tokens that we got for each character during the character setup and place them just below the turn track on your base. These are going to be used to track turns, so once the recon goes, and then once the soldier goes. This is important to make sure that you're managing who's actually activated in each turn, and then many missions have a maximum number of turns before you lose the mission. So it helps you track that as well. Well guys, that wraps up setting up the game, and now we actually get started playing. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it was helpful to you as a walkthrough of how to set up your characters and their decks, how to get your base started, how to get the first mission set up, as well as your location cards, and some hopefully helpful tips on getting your event cards and your blueprint cards kind of organized in order to play. Next time we're going to be jumping straight in and getting started on mission 1, the beginning, and hopefully taking down these 2 bandits who ambushed me in an alleyway. Thanks so much for watching, you guys, and once again, I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to spend with me learning how to set up a board game. I can't wait to start playing this with you. Hopefully soon in the next video we'll get to dive into all that stuff. Until then, if you liked the video, please, think about giving it a like. I'd love to hear from you if you leave me a comment, some feedback, some ideas about how I can make these even better. As well as if you've got it in you, give me a subscribe, let me know you're liking the content, and that way you'll get notified the next time I post a video. Until then, as always, Dungeon Crawlers, may your loot deck draws be legendary.